Anna lives in rural Northwest Ireland, and she has a strong interest in communities undergoing rapid change through climate change and post-industrialization. Her work of the last 7 years, Water Conversations, has taken place in 9 countries. The collaborative aspect of the work has led to working partnerships with artists, scientists, cultural geographers, activists, engineers, and local historians. She's received numerous artistic awards and residencies. Please welcome Anna.
Hello, I hope you can hear me all right. Okay, so thank you very much for having me here. There's a weird echo, oh my God. All right, thanks very much for having me here. What I'm going to talk about this morning is my practice as an artist, as a socially engaged artist. And for the last 10 or 11 years, I've been focusing mainly, not primarily, but mainly on water and water issues through an umbrella titled series of projects called Water Conversations. And as Karen alluded to, this brought me around 9 countries. I started off looking at infrastructural failure of governments to manage water systems correctly. That led me to look at colonial countries of the British Empire. And I've expanded a little bit beyond that. So just as water is mutable and moves and finds its own level, I have been through these projects moving and finding my own level, trying to understand the commonalities that affect the global situation of water provision and how we view water emotionally, spiritually, technically, how we use it domestically, how we use it in industry, how we used it in agriculture. And all these things have come together to build up a body of knowledge that I want to share some of it with you today. And then I'll move on and talk about what I did here in Paonia. But I'm interested in also talking a little bit about socially engaged practice and what artists do and how they do it through the lens of water. And so I also want to talk a little bit about climate change. While I've been in Paonia, I've met lots of people who don't believe in climate change, or people who have different solutions to it, or people who are just really emotionally exhausted by the whole idea of it. And I totally understand all those positions because it is huge. It's a complex subject and it's rolling down like a train towards us, and it's quite scary. So in my artworks, I'm trying to look at sort of some of the emotional impact that may have and how we can build resilience within communities towards finding ways to navigate this difficult space. I was lucky enough to be in Sydney on the 29th of November, which was climate rally in support of the Paris UN conference, COP21, and on that day there were a lot of parades around the world, and people really came out and showed their concern for the environment. And it was a very good thing to be at. I also, with another artist, Wendy Murray, we did a presentation, or I'll talk about it in a little while. We did a project at the Speaker's Corner in the Domain in Sydney. The Speaker's Corner is where people have the opportunity to stand on a podium. It's fixed there, and you can talk about any issue you like. So we chose to use the podium. We booked it, and we chose to talk about water on the day of this march. I'll talk about it later. But I want to just run through very briefly a very brief timeline of climate change and how what we knew and when we knew it, and how science has helped us kind of to gather up the kind of responsibility, to discover what has happened to the planet, how it's happened, and basically it's really a lot to do with the invention of the steam engine and industrial revolution, which has brought us huge wealth and prosperity, but it's also brought us an environmental disaster. So going from the Irish physicist John Tyndall up through the chemists, so people began to track how climate change was affecting this one planet that we have, up until the very first UN Environmental Conference in Stockholm in 1972, where climate change became the very first first time that climate change was mentioned. Although there were protests outside Stockholm at this conference because the environmentalists felt that they weren't going far enough in identifying the problems of the world, at least it was a start. Margaret Thatcher, even though she didn't believe in society, she only believed in the individual, even she, as a chemist, was noticing that there were profound changes happening in the world. Move on up to the Kyoto Protocol, which was agreed. Aspects, we now see the warming that's happening, and Al Gore did a great job, got the Nobel Peace Prize. But where has it brought us, and what do we really know, and what actions do we take? Because we know it's there, it's scary, but what does it mean we have to do as individuals to ameliorate the problems? And part of it has to do with consumption. And we know that, but we're all responsible for our own consumption, I suppose. So I want to just talk about a little bit about the United Nations Conference. The byline for that in 1972 was "Only One Earth," and it had to be sort of pointed out to people there was just one planet with a finite amount of resources into which we were, extracting huge amounts. And so the principles that came out of it were the fundamental right to life in an environment of equality, which brings in the notion of climate justice across the world. Natural resources are not only made of oil and minerals, but include water, earth, flora, and fauna. It seems extraordinary to us nowadays that you would have to spell that out, but in those days, that was what exactly had to do, which, due to their importance, should be protected for present and future generations. So, it was so exciting that even Pakistan and a few other countries brought out a stamp to commemorate Only One Earth. And that was really the start of a really serious attempt by thinkers across the world to address this growing problem. And then to move quickly on to the United Nations Conference in 2015, the Paris Conference. And here we have, there was an accord, an agreement to keep temperature of the planet below 1.5 degrees Celsius, and a maximum of 2 degrees Celsius to keep it below. So this means developing countries and developed countries really have to review their relationship to energy production and consumption, the consumption of goods and services all across the world. We need to really take individual responsibilities through our governments. And it's up to us as well to, petition our governments to continue to stick to the agreements. Now, you'd say, this is a report. The next two images are a summary of Chapter 6 of the Assessment of Climate Change in the Southwest USA. It's a 531-page report. You can get downloaded on the internet. It's really interesting reading. It was prepared for the National Climate Assessment in 2013 by the University of Arizona, with contribution from all the universities in the Southwest. And the major points are that it's going to get warmer. There's going to be less water, less snow, and so this is going to have a major, major impact on the southwestern states, on water provision, farming, agriculture, permaculture, and basically it comes down to adaptability, adapt or die. And this is a very strong report that really gives a very, very clear picture of what's going to happen in the next 25 years. Until 2001. So this is a bit of a map. But you can download it and see what you think about how that might impact on this area. But impact on this area, it will. Ooh. So in my own work around political activism, environmental activism, I have been informed and impressed by the writings of Jean Sharp, who unfortunately, at a great old age, I think of 90, died this January 2018. And He wrote a lot of books around, active citizenship, the idea of seizing democracy back from totalitarian regimes, and he is an absolutely brilliant writer, and his seminal work was The Politics of Nonviolent Action, which is a useful tool in 1973, but it's a very useful document for those of us who are working in environmental activism or any kind of activism, because it shows strategies by which people can, effective governments. Now, some of it involves civil disobedience, but civil disobedience sort of within a lawful structure. I'm going to try and read. I don't think I have enough light, in fact, to read some of these 198 methods of nonviolent action. But I will make this available to any of you who are interested, or you can download it on the internet. And you'll find that, a lot of the actions are around civil disobedience is not taking part in elections or being disruptive within elections, taking part but being disruptive, standing on your own, sit-ins and, oh, look, I've got a light. Fantastic. Okay, so there's formal statements that can be made. Communications with a wider audience, including slogans, banners, posters, leaflets, etc. Group representations, deputation, mock awards, symbolic public acts, displaying of flags and symbolic orders, protest disrobings, that's a good one. New signs and names, haunting officials, taunting officials, pressures on individuals, pressures on governments, pressures on local government, public assemblies, withdrawal information, strikes, sit-ins, blue. In Ireland, they had the Gardaí, the police force, weren't allowed strike. It's a law. But so they had a blue flu, so they all stayed out on one day, and they all had flu on that day. So methods of economic non-cooperation, not paying your taxes, but you need to do that maybe not as an individual but as a community. Industry strikes, citizens' non-cooperation with government, economic interventions, political interventions. It's a very, very good document, and I have found it very useful, thank you, in my work as an artist. And I have used some of those suggestions as strategies for making artworks. Now, this is a report that I'll briefly go through. So what can artists do for socially engaged practice? And what does socially engaged practice look like? And how does it work for engaging with communities? So this is a report from Stockholm University. And it's Arts in a Warming Planet. So they did a study across a huge number of art projects and made this graph as a result of it. The search for divisive actions to remain below 1.5 degrees centigrade of global temperature rise will require profound cultural transformations, yet our knowledge of how to promote and bring about such a deep transformative changes in our minds and behaviours of individuals and societies is still limited. As climate change unravels and the planet becomes increasingly connected, societies will need to articulate a shared purpose that is both engaging and respectful of cultural diversity. The arts are moving beyond raising awareness and are entering the terrain of interdisciplinarity and knowledge co-creation. We conclude that climate arts can contribute positively in fostering the imagination and emotional predisposition for the development and implementation of the transformations necessary to address the 1.5 degrees centigrade challenge. This is a project I did with a group from New York University, a group of academics and artists, and it's called Hello Dear Climate. It's a free access collaborative art project by New York University group of artists and academics that was conceived as a new way to talk about the weather. The project is a collection of posters, I think there's 68 in all, and sound collages that take on climate change with a more personal and conversational tone. The public's encouraged to interact with the project by adding new designs, downloading the posters and distributing them through their own networks. So I downloaded a number of the designs and introduced an interloper design for Ireland. I focused it on the water posters because that's more appropriate to Ireland because we're looking at losing a lot of our coastline with sea level rise. So my poster was Flit to the Mountain, which is up there on the right-hand side top. move rapidly, and that's an iconic mountain on the Sligo. I live near the coast, Sligo coast, and that's the iconic sacred mountain where our megalithic kings and queens are buried in cairns on that mountain. So, but it's going to be surrounded by water. It's right. It's on a promontory, so it's going to be surrounded. So the discussion there was flit to the mountain, get away from the sea. So there's some great posters, and what I did was I produced 1,000 of A3 posters from some of the designs, and they were distributed among people in Hamilton and people who visited the exhibition. And so the idea is to like start conversations about what are we going to do about the water rise. So, but here's some helpful suggestions. This might not be appropriate for Peonia, but wade down your street, get wetter, sample the shrubs. The climate doesn't care about me. Gone to seed, the ignored landscape is delicious. Underwater, float. Grieve the grid. Yeah, what happens? What happens the day it all goes down, electricity goes off, you can't get onto the internet? How are we all going to cope? Here's a pants water filter, I think, which is quite a good one. Biodiversity, it's the land of opportunity. Need exercise? Hurry. We're 5 to 12 on the planetary clock. I think we're even past 5 to 12, to be honest. Watch the weather. Normal, it isn't. Friendship. So, I'm going to expand on the idea of friendship a little bit more in some of the works that I talk about today. And it's the idea of community cooperation and how the only way we are going to survive big changes coming our way is that we work as a community together, and divisions in communities are put aside when it comes to crisis moments. So Water Conversations, the series of work that I've been working on for a number of years. I'm going to talk a little bit about water economies and climate change and artist-led strategies for building community dialogue and resilience. This is a project from 2009, developing countries like Ghana, who were former British colonies. Ghana got independence in 1963 through Nkrumah, who was a hero of the revolution. And this is at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Kumasi. So we were looking as a group of scientists and artists and educators, we were looking at ways to move forward for a developing country in terms of seizing back some of the natural resources. And one of the problems that came to Ghana in 2006 was as a result of a World Bank loan. They were encouraged to privatize the water systems of Ghana, which led to huge inequalities of access, spiraling costs, and not a very good provision. So it didn't solve anything. So my setup of a water kiosk was to look at the vernacular all over West Africa. You see these little kiosks, and people sell all sorts of stuff out of them. I called it the water spot, and in exchange for a drink of water, I would discuss infrastructural failure in Europe, in Ireland, and how that colonial problem had affected all colonies of the British Empire. So here's one of the typical kiosks that I modelled my kiosk on. Inside the kiosk is ways of gathering water and rainwater harvesting in Ireland, and also our crumbling and breaking infrastructure, which was left over from the British rule, and which the Ghanaians completely understood because they have that same leftover system. And so over a period of 3 weeks, with translators, I talked to people about their attitude to water, what their problems was. And one of the main things that came out for me was this idea of people were lamenting the loss of knowledge. They had embedded knowledge when they lived in the villages and in the rural parts, but when they moved to the city, they forgot about the taboos that surround water, and were, talking about how people just forgot their relationship with water. It became hidden. It becomes, when you're living in a village beside a water source, it's very extant and obvious to you what the water is doing, how the health of it is, and what you must or must not do near that water body in order to keep it clean and fresh. And then when you get to the city, it comes out of a tap, it goes down a drain, you don't see it. There's this kind of disconnection with the source itself. This was in conversation with the village chief at Tech Junction. Iridia village, and William Tanho, who told me that under his leadership, they were contesting the water, the privatization of the water, and they have been really fighting it very hard through the unions. They have very strong unions still in Ghana, as a leftover of one of the benefits of British rule, and they were fighting it through, getting to the government through the unions. And this is, communication and unity in strength. I commissioned a commercial painter, sign painter, Eric Adejolo, that's him with the colourful t-shirt, shirt, to paint the surfaces of the... What they do in Ghana is they don't use plastic stick-ons because it doesn't last in the tropical weather, so everything's hand-painted onto the signs, which gives a beautiful kind of aesthetic to all the work. And so what William Tahoe was telling me about was the fact that under Nkrumah, at the beginning of independence, the promises of all natural resources of Ghana would be for the people. But unfortunately, under pressure from world banks and loan structures, a lot of the natural resources were being stripped out of the country, including the provision of water. The good news is that this has been rescinded, and the government took back control, after pressure from the unions, took back control and renationalised the water systems in Ghana. Not saying it's solved all the problems, but at least it's in the power of the people. Water Conversations Pani Pachau was a project I did with Carol Hummel from Ohio, and it was across 5 cities across northern India. It was an art caravan, and 36 artists moved by train across different cities in northern India. And because of this, our touch had to be very light on the landscape. We did mostly performance work in villages and in towns, and our focus was on water. So we produced this poster. We got an Orison artist to draw the symbol. We said, how would you visually say water in India? And this was the poster that was developed. And we printed 1,000 of these posters and went across and elicited conversations as we went. Most of these photographs are from Lake Dal in Kashmir. And we spent a week with the farmers on Lake Dal. And I have to say we learned an awful lot about water and resilience in communities to governmental interference, and also to well-meaning ecologists from other countries coming over and telling them what to do, and completely ignoring the embedded knowledge of the native peoples of that lake. They have been there for millennia, and they know exactly about how to preserve the health and beauty of the lake. They are organic farmers. There's 20,000 farmers on the lake. They live in very modest homes, and they were under pressure from the Indian government in 2005. They were made by Monsanto seeds. They discovered that the seeds didn't produce the following year because they had been seed saving for millennia. So they burned the seeds and went back to their own. So this was a typical piece of civil disobedience. Soldiers were sent out to stop them doing it, but then they just blockaded it. So a bit of civil disobedience. The other thing that I learned about this community of farmers is they work together. So they decide what's going to happen, what the health of the lake is, what the water is, the floating gardens, and they work together on a plan for the following year. So they'll plant certain foods depending on the weather, and they work together. They do not work as independent farmers. So this is the famous farmers market. It's a 5 a.m. Meeting by boat on Lake Dal, and then it goes off to the markets in Srinagar and across northern India. The poster was put up in Connaught Place in New Delhi, and also this is where a poster becomes a sculpture. When you mass them together, you can make an aesthetic statement around a sculptural form, or it can just be a piece of paper. But it's to engender discussion and debate around. Really, when you go to small communities in India, you don't need to tell them anything about water conservation. They use less than 10 gallons or 10 litres of water a day, most of them, They are so economical, and a lot of grey water reusage. So we're moving quickly on to Broken Hill, which is an industrial landscape in New South Wales, in the corner of the desert, made most of the wealth for Australia, and it's a mining town. Now, it's a mining town on its knees because most of the mines are closed. There's only a couple still open, but this community don't want to leave. They've been there a couple of hundred years. They feel embedded in the community and they want to make it work. So they're rediscovering how to be a community beyond mining, and coming up with quite interesting land remediation ideas and phytoremediation for the soil. So they have some very innovative expressions and community initiatives there. So they want to stay, but they've run out of water. This is the man-made lake system that interrupts the Darling River and has produced catastrophic failure of the system to bring water to that community and to further on down. Now this is 2015. Now I've just seen on Facebook there's a little 3-minute video about the death of the Darling River. So the Darling River is now actually nearly dead. And the reason for this is upstream in Queensland, they have been planting cotton. Australia was not designed to be a floodplain irrigation landscape, and the cotton has been temporarily quite economically beneficial to the farmers there, but the huge water resources that it demands means that they bought up, it's actually a Chinese company, and they bought up all the water rights leases around that area, and they're also illegally taking water from the Darling River. So, which means further on down, this man-made system of the Lake Pamaroo outlet regulator and all that area is devastated. This is the pipeline that used to bring the water to Broken Hill. I was lucky enough to spend time with Dr. Beryl Carmichael, Auntie Beryl, who is an elder of the Nyampi people, her people were dislocated and relocated from that landscape in order to build this failed water system. Auntie Beryl is quite strong in that they never asked Aboriginal people for their opinion on how to manage the landscape. And she said they never got it right since they arrived. White people arrived in Australia 200 years ago and declared it terras nullius, empty land. They have not listened to the Aboriginal voices who understand exactly how to manage a very delicate ecosystem. So she's quite scathing about what happened and has been trying to speak to the water minister, but he's not responding. So these were the protests. There was an idea to bore water, and the locals didn't want to bore the water. They wanted to sort out, the river system, clean out the river. So Wendy Murray, a New Zealand artist who lives in Sydney, and I brought, after the research that I did in Broken Hill, brought images to Sydney. One of the reasons we did this is because people in Sydney, in our own state, just didn't know what was going on with the Darling River, didn't really care, it doesn't affect us, we've got water, so it's fine. And so we were trying to highlight rural issues in cities and so we made a series of posters which we put around Sydney and created a zine which we gave out at the Climate March at Speaker's Corner, and the zine encouraged people to petition the government to declare water as a human right in Australia. The UN resolution of water as a human right was not signed up to by the United States or by Australia or New Zealand, and didn't want to really go down the line of recognising water as a sacred body or as a body with rights. So, because economies are more important than ecologies in some countries. So unfortunately, we thought that, but if the citizens of Australia got behind this, because people are very concerned about water in Australia, and climate change is affecting them first. They are getting really the very deepest effects of climate change. It's like a testing ground almost. So we were encouraging them, showed them how to, on the Facebook page, showed them how to actually petition their government through the legislator. So moving to another stress to landscape is the Gobi Desert in Mongolia. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, there's been a land grab in the Gobi Desert, and a lot of parcels of land have been sold off for mining, strip mining. It's a very rich mineral desert, And what the mining has done is created, yet again, an economy around water. So the nomadic tribes who, for millennia, have been traversing this landscape with their herds have been dislocated and displaced by the massive use of water used by mining. And so this piece that I made is, is really to talk about what's more valuable, water as a precious life source, or gold. So in the shape of the Ursa Major, I made solar stills from a survival handbook and yielded some water out of it. I tried rainwater harvesting, I tried dew collection, but the only thing that really worked in the desert in August, July, August in 2012 was the solar stills. So it's difficult to get water in the Gobi Desert. I spent time with a nomadic family on the summer pastures with Batsuris, Purvi, his wife and family. They're fully self-sufficient off-grid nomadic farmers following water sources through the Dungobi landscape. Meat, cheese and Iraq fermented mare's milk are their major produce, but they also produce felt from the fur of the animals, animal hair rope. So when you look at you can't really see in this photograph, but the ropes that are holding down the gur structure are all made of animal hair. So they braid in the winter. They collect the hair during the summer, and then in the winter when it's very cold and inhospitable outside, they make felt and they braid the hair. Animal dung is dried and used for cooking and heating fuel. So this is Batsuris and Dolgar, his daughter, milking the mares to make Iraq, which is a fermented mare's milk. It's delicious, but it's very hard on your tummy if you're not used to it. Purvi and Ini are making goat's cheese. They make goats and sheep cheese, which I think I didn't point out, but on the roof you see the cheese is drying on the roof, so they dry the cheese for the winter. So you can learn a lot from embedded local knowledge. So this is your survival solar still if you're ever stuck in a desert. Use the vegetation, use a bit of plastic, carry a bit of plastic with you, and use a stone and use the condensation. And it yielded 3.5 litres of water. Not enough to really survive, but enough to get by. Another project that I've been working on in Spain has been, there's an increasing desertification in Spain as a result of the creeping Sahara Desert, and they're having longer and longer drought periods. This is a farm and an artist residency, and we're doing a test of sculptures that are made to collect dew, but also to function as rain funnels in the landscape. So into a terraced garden area with swales built into it, we've put these sculptures and we're testing to see which ones yield the most, what design yields the most water harvesting into the swales and what plants grow better with which sculpture. So there's 4 designs. When we decide which one has been the most successful, I'm making it free access for the farmers of the region to take a template, and then they can make their own rain funnels in their swales. Water Conversations Alberta, Bewildered in Banff, has been the first time I used a banner, and I'm talking about this because I'm using a banner in the Peonia work that I did. And I like the use of the banner. It reminds me of social action from the 1960s when people really got up and protested about stuff. I like to recall that idea of, but also Gene Sharp's exhortations to people to get out, use language in the public space, use the public sphere to voice your concerns and worries about the environment. In this case, I'm bewildered. I'm in Banff National Park. It's called a wilderness. I'm bewildered by the fact that they had to remove the indigenous people to call it a wilderness. And then up the road, not too far away, is the Alberta tar sands. There seems to be a disconnect between looking at the landscape from the point of view of resource extraction, wilderness, and climate change. This was February in Banff, and it was melting unseasonably fast in February, so the snow cap was melting really fast. Bewildered again. And you can see how it's melting. That should be frozen up until April. So the tar sands is contributing to the warming of the Canadian landscape, which of course is going to have a huge knock-on effect further on down the line. Last year I was lucky enough to be in Santa Fe for 3 months at a water rights residency, and one of the projects I did was to look at environmental solidarity and environmental justice in terms of people who are most affected by industrial landscape poisoning and water poisoning. And I was inspired by this by a story I heard. In 1847, the Choctaw Nation leaders in eastern Oklahoma managed to save up $170 for the relief of the starving poor in Ireland. Only 16 years after their forced relocation, known as the Trail of Tears, they showed great empathy in making such a generous gift to unknown strangers. This act of global solidarity has been officially recognised by the Irish nation. In 1995, the Irish President, Mary Robinson, later UN Commissioner for Human Rights, visited the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma to thank the Choctaws for their generosity towards the Irish, with whom she noted their only link was a common humanity, a common sense of another's people's suffering, as the Choctaw Nation had suffered when being removed from their tribal lands. So I have taken that idea of global solidarity, and I make gifts of artworks to communities who are fighting against environmental injustices. This community, the Redwater Pond Road community, were impacted by the uranium mine spill in 1979. And their land is quite severely affected by it, and so is the health of the community. 5 minutes. Okay. So this is the banner that I made. I did a workshop with the community. 20 members of the community turned up. We did a workshop and we co-designed the banner. I made the banner and then delivered it to the community last year, 20th of April 2017, and then this year was lucky enough to go down to their 39th annual Uranium Legacy Remembrance and Action Day and see the banner in action. Another strategy I use as an artist in socially engaged practice is to make portable sculptures. I like to leave as little trace and use as few materials as possible in the exercise of my work. This piece is about the fiction of the protection that the oil industry gives us. Obviously, that umbrella is not really protecting me from anything, but there is this fiction that we still get into our car and turn on the engine, and I'm very aware of my own carbon footprint, and I'm trying to make efforts to ameliorate that. But it's something that we all have to really think about. This was the second piece I did, Walking Cochiti Dam, in collaboration with Courtney Leonard, who was a fellow resident in Santa Fe Art Institute. And we walked for 5 miles from Cochiti Dam waters to the point of release of the Rio Grande River. We worked with the community, the Cochiti Pueblo, for permission to do this, and they liked the idea that we were highlighting the interruption this dam had put onto the river. It disrupted their own agricultural processes and was the subject of a lawsuit. So the dam was also, it's believed that the dam was really built to collect sediment washing down from Los Alamos from the Manhattan Project. There's a lot of waste material that was put into the ground before maybe scientists really understood the nature of leaching in soil, and so the Nuke Watch people call this dam Plutonium Dam. So we carried water from the dam to the release point of the interrupted river as a kind of an emotional and symbolic release of the water for the Pueblo. The Pueblo's in the background there behind Courtney. And that was our return after the 5-mile walk with the water. It was very heavy. I must say, people who walk with water around the world, huge respect. So, water conversations. What have I done here in Peonia? And I'm running out of time now, so I'll have to be quick. I've done 2 projects here since I arrived, and bringing all that experience and research from the places I've been before I did two. One is called Harvest the Rain, and the other one is Walk North. Harvest the Rain is a banner that I've made as a gift to the local high school. I would like to see it used as an educational tool to talk about climate change, to talk about water provision, to talk about systems of water harvesting and grey water reuse, bringing into environmental science the idea of how precious and very finite water sources can be capitalised upon even as the temperature goes up. So as a teaching tool and supported by that, I'm proposing 2 murals for the town that celebrate the 2016 legislation, which is the House Bill 1600, which is the grey water, or sorry, it's the barrel harvesting that's now legal. So 2 years on from that law, I don't see an awful lot of barrel use here, but I think, you know, we could encourage that. You can also collect water straight off your roof into your garden, and if you use swales, it's a very good way of capitalising on the free water that falls from the sky. The second project is a grey water reuse system that I'm proposing for what's going to be the new plumbing shop, and that could be, again, that could be in celebration of Regulation 86, which is Colorado state law that has been passed, but it's up to each county to adopt it. And this is where you, the citizen, gets the opportunity to demand that legislation be adopted by your county so that you can grey water use legally in your house. And again, save as much water as possible, because water is going to get scarcer and scarcer as the temperature heats up. And the second work I did was a mourning for the retreating glaciers in North America. And I walked with a block of ice, a 10-pound block of ice, through Peony for 2 hours as it melted. And this is a redemptive walk where I'm drawing attention to the idea that we must emotionally and physically get to terms with what's coming down the road. We can also be innovative in how we approach it. We can make our communities resilient. We can make our communities climate resilient. But I think it's very important that we personally take responsibility for our own emotional trauma of this and get over it. We can't afford to feel guilty about our consumption anymore. We now have to just get active and sort out our consumption and find ways of doing it. So, I'm suggesting we each do that individually, but as a community. Nobody I have found in Peony, and I have been talking to as many people as I can cross-community, in the homesteaders and the coal miners and the organic, more liberal maybe sometimes, folk here, and nobody contests the idea that, you know, this is one area where you can all get together and work as a team to become climate resilient. Another image from it. I'm nearly there, don't worry. This is the embroidery that I used. And this is, I worked with Clara Penna's beautiful, wonderful, very talented student team who took the photographs of this performance, as did Deirdre, took a few. And also they did a wonderful little video for me. It's 3 minutes long, bear with me if we could show it. Let's try.
questions, I can bring the mic to you.
That was an amazing short piece, and I thank you for doing that work. What I wonder after watching the video was it seemed like a singular journey for you. And did you encounter people along the way? What were people's reactions, and did you get into conversations while you were doing this?
Well, when I'm on a walk, I stay in the moment. It's a performance, so I try not to. People did try to engage with me, and I did engage with people afterwards. But at the time, I'm trying to stay in a meditative state for the walk. It's also quite physically difficult carrying for 2 hours. I was getting a lot of cramps, so just staying in the moment. But the conversations afterwards were quite interesting. People were asking me what I was doing. They made the connection. Some of the conversations were about, like, well, what can we do? It's happening. It's too late. Some people feel it's too late. Some people feel Gaia will heal the world and we don't have to do anything. Other people think the government can throw money at it. It's a complex set of different responses. One guy revved his engine really hard at me. You know, like, I don't try and pass judgment on other people's, you know, I see it as a personal journey that I'm trying to kind of understand my own relationship to oil and to fight for water as best I can in wherever I find myself, if that answers your question.
Anna, thank you so much. That was so powerful. And I'm curious as to why you selected glaciers, particularly in relation to a water conversation about Paonia. Did you do it as an overall emphasis on the effect on glaciers melting relative to climate change, or was there something particular about Paonia's relationship to melting glaciers, say, in the Rocky Mountains and our water supply?
Well, I remember on a project I did years ago, I met this woman from California, and she kept a picture of the Rockies over her tap to remind her every time she turned on her tap where her water was coming from, and to be respectful of that, and to turn off her tap and not, you know, like there is a stat that the average American uses 80 to 100 gallons of water a day, you know, that's domestic use. Showering, you know, washing, all the things. And a lot of that, obviously, if it's not grey water reused, you know, washes down the Swanee. So the bigger question around mourning the glaciers is, where's the water going to come from when it's all melted? If there's no snowpack anymore, where is the water sources? What's left? You know, what do we have left in the bank? And if we don't start, you know, being more economical with the water we have, then what's going to happen into the future? So mourning the glaciers, for me, is a global issue. It might be local to here, but it's also a global issue because we're affected by it everywhere. And, you know, that's something that we're all having to come to terms with. What are we going to do? My proposal in Ireland is move to the hills, but, you know, like, it's half joking, but not really. People are already having to move away from the coast.
We have time for a couple more questions.
Thank you, Anna. That was moving. And in the conversations that you do in all these different communities, I'm wondering how you push through when you get pushback, per se, with organizations or people. And I realize that a lot of what you're doing is relational. You're starting conversations. But when you don't receive support, what do you do?
Well, you know, there has been talk, you know, in environmental circles of the trauma that dealing with this on a day-to-day basis can bring to the individual, you know. And, you know, we do have to mind ourselves, you know, as people dealing with the consequences and the onslaught of climate change. or whatever field we're in, if we're in environmental science or if we're artists or whatever field we practice. It is quite a, it's a difficult picture. I find pushback is, I just try and have as least judgment as I have. I'm as open to other people's opinions. I understand where they come from. People have opinions about things, sometimes because they've been fed the wrong information. And so the only way is to try and very gently have a conversation in a non-threatening way about there are different points of view. I think what happens is it often becomes quite amplified and adversarial in environmental, and people are shouting at each other. Nothing gets done in that way. And it really does take a lot of patience and sitting down with people. I have done conflict resolution studies, and there are ways in which you must show respect for other people's opinions. Even if you fundamentally do not agree with one word they've said, you have to show respect and find ways to navigate into an area where they will accept one aspect of what you're saying. So it's a difficult path sometimes, but there's a lot of really brilliant conversations you have along the way, and surprising support out of weird places. So you never know.
One more question here.
The use of our water seems to be like limited to the little people of the towns and whatnot. Like, there's really not much left after the corporations, the mining, the logging, the gas and the oil, the drilling. It takes millions and billions of gallons of water. And my question is like, do you have any specific guidance to give, like there's the small people, the villagers, little Paonia people, like when we limit our use of water, start using our gray water, things like that, and like it's such a minuscule effect compared to like what the big corporations are doing. They're using millions of gallons every day. How can the people feel like what we do actually has a greater effect, so we feel more motivated to be more conscious about our water?
Well, good point, and I do think that it's about changing culture. We watched a film the other day, Normal is over. Normal is now over. We have to think of building resilience in other ways. It might be going back to looking at embedded knowledge. There might be knowledge people had before in how the irrigation in this valley worked. I think, but I also think that community need to get together and work together on finding creative solutions. And I think one thing nobody will disagree with, it's even legal, is the rainwater harvesting in the barrels and harvesting off the roof, rebuilding your gardens, making them more water friendly in terms of runoff. And that's the same for farming. Like, water conservation, nobody can argue against it. It's small, but it is a change of culture. And changing that culture is fundamental because it spreads. I remember talking to somebody who said after the Second World War in Germany, the place was a mess. They had to rebuild the country. And they also had to rebuild a recycling and how to deal with the mess that was left, the industrial mess, the war effort mess, and all that. And it took a generation, but they changed the culture. And so it can start small in small communities. It can be a cross-community link between changing cultures and getting consumption down. And so saving that little bit of water is actually valuable. You have to see every drop as a valuable saving. And so macro, micro energies. But will be about changing the culture here and thinking about what do we do that's wasteful? Are we growing the right crop? Is this the right crop for this coming environmental disaster? Should we be growing this or should we be growing that? These are conversations that should be happening across farms. It shouldn't just be one farm making that decision. It should be a collective decision-making process of how best to use the water. Stop seeing my water rights as my water and see it as a collective water engagement. And I think that will go a long way to helping heal some of the rifts within this community.
Okay, Anna, thank you so much.
you.
Very appreciated.